Great, yeah, so my name is Brooke, and my husband Patrick there and I are going to be doing a presentation. And thank you guys for having us, we really appreciate it. We're involved with different things in town. We're not officially representing any individual organization, but we're really excited to share with you guys about invasive plants and what we can do as a community and what we are doing as a community, which is very exciting. All right, and so the presentation overview. So for some terminology, we're going to be using invasive plants as the terminology. In the field, there's a bunch of different ways to call these types of plants. It can be non-native aggressive plants, non-indigenous plants, but we've chosen invasive plants as kind of the theme with scientific papers. We're going to talk a little bit about the ecological role of native plants, as well as the disruption in forest structure that invasive plants do. Then we'll talk a little bit about climate's role in invasive plants, some common invasive plants that you may see around town or in your own yard, what is coming our way in our region. Then we're going to dive into the community project in Danforth, which Patrick's going to take over and talk about that, and everything that we can do as individuals to help with this issue. So I'm going to touch upon native plants just slightly because I did a whole talk on it before, but we have native plant recommendations that are on the Conservation Commission's website. And so it covers different things like host plants and food resources for wildlife. And this list is specific to Hudson, and it can be found on the CONCOM website. And so I want to talk a little bit about host plants and food resources because it's really important in the context of invasive plants. So one of the biggest host plant for monarchs is milkweed. So milkweed is essential for monarch reproduction. In the egg stage and in the larval stage as the caterpillar, it's crucial that milkweed exists. That is the only type of plant that they will reproduce on. And so it's a very big essential component to have these. And so that's swamp milkweed down there, and then that is butterfly weed, and those are all very important for reproduction. And so the reason why I mention this is because relationships with host plants, it's not just the monarch, but just as a monarch as an example, this relationship formed during glacial recession, so about 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. There was a gene that was a mutation that allowed a normally toxic plant to be able to use it as a host plant. And so it's a very, very old relationship. And so the question is that if invasive plants come in and outcompete native plants such as milkweed or such as these host plants, what happens to that relationship? What happens to the hosts? What happens to the monarch butterflies? And so like I said, there's a whole bunch of animals that have host plants. It's not just the monarch butterfly. There's all sorts of skippers, all sorts of butterflies that have very specific native plants that they have to use in order to reproduce. And if those aren't there, then they're kind of out of luck with that. And then kind of touching upon our native bees too. We have so many native bees. I think there's 350 species of native bees that live in New England. It's a lot. Wow. And they're very reliant on very specific plants as well. And so a special shout out to Green Hudson's newsletter because that's how I found this chart. This is with the lab. I believe it's at UMass. It's Dr. Giger, I'm going to mispronounce it, but at UMass he went through and he found all of these different pollen sources for all of these bees and as well as butterflies. So they're very specific, like what kind of things that they use, and a lot of times that actually contributes to their kind of endangered status with some of them. And there's also preferred food sources, so not only pollen but nectar. There's very specific plants that these bumblebees and butterflies and other bees really rely on that are native plants. And so what happens when invasive plants come in? Well, there's a biodiversity reduction. So the invasive plants may outcompete and choke out these native plants, and that causes some pretty significant ecological disruption. You can create a risk of having this monoculture. So instead of having a field or a forest that has all different kinds of little plants everywhere, it's just straight barberry, which we've definitely seen out in the woods. And so having the diversity allows for that reproduction. Bloom times can also be heavily impacted. So whereas in a meadow, typically you would have different things blooming at different times to have a constant food resource, if you have a monoculture, just one singular plant that's outcompeting everything, then that nectar or that pollen only comes out at one time a year, which can be dangerous for wildlife. And then studies have shown that sometimes we see these and we're like, oh wow, like there's a bunch of pollinators like on this specific plant, like a knotweed or something like that. But the good news is that there are studies that show if those are removed, the animals that were relying on that will just move to a different resource. So it's important that we cultivate native plants as well as eliminating invasive plants. And in the case of the Oriental bittersweet, there's abundant berries everywhere, but there's very little nutritional value. So birds will eat it big time for sure. But especially with migratory birds, it's of less nutritional value. So it would be much better if they were eating things like winterberry. And then just kind of briefly skimming over this, because I had kind of touched upon this in my native plant talk. But there were two big disruptions in New England landscape. One of them was sheep fever. And so that was a very big popular time for merino wool due to a bunch of historical components that it was very profitable to have merino wool. And so I believe 90% of the forests were cleared in Massachusetts in order to make way for fields for these guys. And then once that sheep fever died down, there was also still disruption even after regrowth with the 1938 hurricane. And so this is kind of the change you can see. Great reforestation that's coming back from 1830, was just when the merino wool became popular. That's also why you see the stone walls everywhere. It's from the sheep, yes. And then these are changes that happened in the very early colonial times to modern times. So you can see that even some of our native plants have shifted as a result of large-scale disruption. And in the 1938 hurricane, that eliminated, I think it was 1,000 square miles of forest, or 600,000 acres of forest land was affected. It was a pretty big hurricane. And so how does this relate to invasive plants? Well, there's a lot of human-made factors that influence our current landscape. And it's heavily altered. So sometimes the seed banks aren't always great when there's these heavily altered areas. So sometimes it needs a little bit of help to bring some of these native plants back to altered landscapes. And then in conjunction with climate change, it provides an opportunity for invasive plants to come in. And we're constantly learning about our natural world and adding to our ecological knowledge. So it's always very important, I think, to keep an open mind to kind of try to figure out how we can help solve this. And so in multi-dimensional complex structures, you have overstory, you have mid-story, understory, and ground cover, right? And so, like I said, the seed bank may need regenerative assistance if there's going to be, if there's a large-scale disturbance. And preventing a monoculture of invasive plants forming, especially during a disturbance event, even if it's something like a natural tree falling down and just opens up the area. Well, if it's near a road, invasive plants might come in and try to really take an opportunity with that. We have certainly seen that around town too. And just to talk a little bit about climate change, it is cold today, like, don't get me wrong, but an overall trend, it is slowly getting warmer in our winters as a overall trend. So this is the temperature change in Massachusetts since 1895, and so you can see kind of like with these kind of cold and hot markers, it is slowly getting warmer in our winter time. I'm going to turn it over to Pat, or we're going to kind of exchange on this one, but this is the plant hardiness map, so if you want to come over, we can kind of tag team this.
I can do it.
Okay, yeah, you can do it.
Okay. Yeah, so you can really see the effect of the climate change even from the USDA recommendations in recent years. In 2012, this was our plant hardiness map, which kind of indicates, what plants you can grow, pick up from the local garden center. And within the last 12 years, we have shifted climate zones. And most importantly, most of Massachusetts has greatly changed climate zones. And this is just going to continue. This isn't just Massachusetts. I don't have the Connecticut map. They've changed. Everyone has changed. And so this leads to why invasives are just sort of this wait and ticking time bomb that climate change is going to start to accelerate as it continues to warm. Do you want to do the slide?
Sure, and so yeah, as Patrick was saying, we've shifted from zone 5 to 6. So there's kind of a progression upwards as we would kind of anticipate with the climate change. And so the competition comes in is that there's earlier bloom times. They're starting to survive. Cold snaps aren't as prolonged or as frequent anymore. And there's also longer reproduction periods. Like when we go out in the woods, we see barberry and burning bush still kicking way late in the fall when everything else has gone dormant. And a lot of times they even come out earlier too, so there's a competitive advantage there. And then the chemical advantages as well can also impact it. And the shorter winters with less snow, less frozen ground creates more opportunity. In the ecological niche, there's a lack of predators. There's not a lot of things that eat thorny barberry. And then a lack of competitors. And so that, that ecological system they developed in is not have the same checks and balances that ours do. And so that's why they're able to get that competitive edge.
So where will we be in 60 years? Brooke and I are originally from Maryland, so we're actually going to get Maryland weather in about 60 years. That's sort of what is projected. And so with that, you can start to see what is coming our way if you drive down to DC and Virginia in the spring and the summer and the fall, see what's blooming, see what looks out of place. Looking out of place is important in sort of this hunt for invasives. It doesn't look quite right. You can see it through some of the pictures. And as you start to learn invasives, you can start to notice them everywhere. And it's probably going to drive you crazy. So just a disclaimer. But essentially, 60 years from now, we're projected a similar climate to Maryland. So 100 degrees, humid summers, not much snow. Basically, these plants that Brooke mentioned that would otherwise have died, not survived, are now able to survive. And what does that do to our native plants that are here? They too are going to start moving. And so you're already kind of seeing increased heat if you go to the Marlborough-Sudbury State Forest between us and Sudbury. A lot of those dying trees, they're red pines. And so with the heat stress and the drought and invasive bugs, which are not covered in invasive bugs, is killing those trees. And that's going to lead to stuff moving in. Emerald ash borer, big one, Williodendron. Historically, you have the chestnut blight, the Dutch elm disease. So like, these waves of disturbances open it up, which is why we have to protect the forests we have and fight back against these invasives. So we're going to talk about some common invasive plants to Hudson. Before we go through this, does anyone know where a lot of these plants originally came from and why they are here?
Asia?
A lot of them came from Asia, but why do they come from Asia?
People thought they were really pretty and or nice plants and started planting them.
Yeah, people thought they were really pretty.
Or imported, I'm going to guess, produce, but I don't know.
Not so much the produce. Some of them were brought over for like agricultural regions, for like erosion or feeding cows. But also, mainly they look pretty, right? And also what Brooke touched on, a lot of them are not eaten by native species in New England or America, right? Everyone loves to plant a pretty flower in their yard. No one likes their flower to be eaten by a rabbit. However, a native flower serves that purpose to that rabbit if it's from New England like an aster, or what a rabbit like in our yard is, or rhododendrons. But a Japanese barberry, a burner bush, or a Japanese barberry doesn't taste good to a bug from here or an ant from here. And so when Brooke says there's no predators, nothing is eating them, right? The sort of bugs, diseases here are not predated on them. So we will start with burning bush, which this is a very pretty looking plant. I'll pass it to Brooke since you made these slides, and basically I will scroll through them.
Yeah, so burning bush we see a lot in the woods when we're doing our invasive plant removal activities. And so it's native to northeastern Asia, and it was introduced in the 1850s. That's kind of around the time they were cultivating pretty plants. It's a shrub, and the biggest indicators are these bright red leaves that happen, and it's winged. It's kind of hard to see initially, but these little twigs here actually have like these flaky things that come out on the side, and so they're able to make out like little runners and stuff. They've spread very, very quickly.
And people love them.
And people love them. I mean, they are pretty. I'm not gonna lie.
They are pretty. Yeah. It makes them easier to find in the woods in the fall.
This is true.
So.
And then there's the Oriental Bittersweet. So you may be familiar with this one. It does really choke out trees. It is very easy to spread too. It's a woody vine. They have bright red berries and yellow capsules. There is a native kind. I don't think I've ever seen it out in the wild, honestly. No. But it does have different colors with the berries. So if you're ever nervous, like just look at the berries. If it's a yellow capsule with a red berry, then it's the invasive kind. And then Japanese barberry, our hands are very familiar with this one because there's a lot of thorns involved in it. And so because there's thorns, not a lot of things eat it, so you're not going to get predation, but it does very rapidly spread, and we'll show that in just a minute. One of the biggest indicators is these yellow roots. So when we're digging them out, it is the only thing I've ever seen in the woods with yellow roots. It is so bizarre. It's like a highlighter yellow.
Neon yellow.
Yes. And then Japanese knotweed. Patrick was actually telling me it's native to volcanoes, which is wild. Which is why it's so difficult to get rid of. Like, roots are up to 30 feet, I think, is what it could get deep down to. Yeah, and it can even get into destroying. It's so powerful. We've actually seen it come up through people's asphalt in their driveways, that it's so strong and getting into foundations. Yeah. Yeah,
and I had a couple things through the volcano thing. Yeah, so it actually evolved in Japan around like volcanic hot airs. And this guy from England saw it and was like, oh, this would be great to stabilize like the coal waste heaps. And it was perfect for it. So a plant that's been evolved to be run over by lava and then survive is a fun one to get rid of. And it's actually illegal in England to buy a house with knotweed. There's an insurance company will not insure it because it will go through the foundation. And that's a problem here. There's a lot of old stone foundations around town. Okay, so I will start with what is coming, right? So essentially, has anyone heard of the Bradford pear?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Bradford pear in the USDA's infinite wisdom engineered this perfect street tree back in the 50s. That corresponded with the growth of suburbia. Turns out that what is derived from the Calgary pear crossbred with the Bradford pear at the National Arboretum, and then it started spreading to the wild. And so it's a massive problem down south and in the Midwest. If you drive down the New Jersey Turnpike in the spring, you see these white flowers. If you go down to Maryland, where I'm from, it's everywhere. And like I would say these are not that bad based on these pictures. I do have a link to this article in the Washington Post. I'll make it a guest link so anyone can read it. It's a fascinating story about it. And this is something that actually Massachusetts has just made illegal to kind of sell. However, it's still already here. This is a picture I took in Maryland months ago. All of those red trees are Bradford pears. And like, that's actually not that bad. It would just take over everything. And they're starting to spread around Hudson. I could point out the different locations. They're just beginning. And something else that is coming, and there's a lot of things that are coming. The one we really have to watch out for is everyone's favorite kudzu.
Oh no.
I used to live in Georgia, down in Atlanta, where there's tons of kudzu. If you thought bittersweet was bad, this is much worse. And so I've seen this in Southern Connecticut. So hopefully it holds off, just as you're in New York. But this goes with looking like what's coming with the climate. There's a whole list of early detection plants, which I'll share a link to, of stuff the state's watching out for. And I've been keeping a close eye on around town and other groups, but it's important. It's just like any infestation, you want to nip it early, because we will show you what happens when you don't, and kind of all the work that kind of goes into it. So how can we prepare for what's coming, and how can we address this? One of the courses, do not plant anything on the banned plant list. Most of these are already banned for sale. However, the problem is that a lot of these plants were started planted in the 70s and the 80s, and they're already here, and they're spread. So if they're banned, it doesn't do anything, because they're spread all over the place. However, the state's been very proactive on adding stuff recently that is coming, but it doesn't address the major issue of these plants are all over the place. So one of the worst offenders at the moment, Brooks covered a lot of these. A couple we didn't cover: tree of heaven, honeysuckers, multiflora rose, and the Norway maple. That one's all over the place, but that's a trickier one because it provides a lot of good tree canopy cover, and I would view it not as aggressive as some of these other ones, and not as disruptive. So also, why are some of these important? Japanese barberry in particular has been linked to the spread of ticks and Lyme disease. Essentially, the monoculture of barberry basically forms a protective layer for like the mice that basically the ticks feed on, increases the humidity. So essentially, hawks cannot get the mice and kill them. They're protected over the winter. It kind of creates a microclimate, allows more ticks to thrive. and about 15 times the amount of predominance of Lyme disease in forests with a lot of invasives, including barberry, compared to outside. They also do some other interesting stuff, which kind of creates a self-propagating loop. And a lot of these plants do this is because this plant evolved in different location, it lets off these chemical signals which affect other plants. And so it does that because it's like filling out of space for itself, and it tells that other plants don't grow here, I'm poisonous. And so that allows similar invasives from similar locations where they came from to infect the same area, but kill off or kind of slow down the growth of native plants. And this is a common theme, is usually when you see one, there's more, and there's different types. And so it sort of changes ecosystem. And then one other one I'll touch on, the tree of heaven. You probably heard this one on the news, especially with the spotted lanternfly. This is important because these spotted lanternflies feed on maples, they feed on apple trees, they feed on grapevines. And so they suck the sap out and it kills these plants. And so there's a lot of big apple orchards and stuff up here. So it starts becoming like an economic hazard for the state. Maybe not so much in Hudson, but a lot of the neighboring communities. Well, Hudson has big farms, but especially Stowe and Lancaster and Bolton, and when you get up to like New Hampshire, all those places that have these big fall event apple orchards are all at risk because of the spotted lanternfly. But that's only possible because the tree of heaven was brought over in the 1800s, and it's now spread all over the place. So they kind of work in concert. And this kind of leads us to the Danforth project of what we're working on in Hudson. And so, quick introduction about the Danforth Conservation Land. Danforth Conservation Land is our largest conservation land in Hudson. It's about 80 acres, and this land was heavily infested with basically invasives. And how did it get infested with invasives? Brooke mentioned, sheep fever, there were stone walls back there. We had a hurricane. From talking to people on my darts team, apparently it was a fun place to hang out with your cars and drink back basically in the 80s. So it was heavily disturbed, particularly in this lower area, particularly before it became protected by the town. And so this allowed, particularly at that time period, to go for suburbia, the growth of Home Depot and box stores and garden centers that sow these plants, which are good for your yard that rabbits won't eat, to start to spread into the forest. And so what happens is that when the forest is disturbed, the understory is wiped out, is replaced with this non-native understory. And so even though it looks like a healthy forest, you have all these trees, it's not what a forest should look like. And so I think when we mapped it originally, probably like 10 acres of heavy infestation.
It was a lot, yeah.
Quite a bit, and there was quite a bit that small patches and then areas we had to watch out. And so we started this project through the ComCom, and because we want to clean up a conservation land. It was going to be a public health hazard. People would walk back there with their dogs, you get ticks, stuff like that. So we decided to kind of work with volunteers in the town and start going after this project. And I'm going to talk about kind of how we did it and the changes we were seeing in Danforth. So the project was kind of started kind of a little bit at a time, right? It's hard to see this picture. This is taken in the fall. These patches are barberry patches. This is not a monoculture. This is like the edge of it. But when we started this project, we had to figure out, how do we approach this? Can we even dig it out ourselves? How is this even going to work? And so through a couple of test digging, we were like, okay, it's not too hard. You can dig out with a shovel, you don't get poked in the face, and dig it out. Learn some stuff. Can start to plan. And so when I talk about what a forest shouldn't look like, this is not what a forest should look like, right? So like this is the main trail in the Danforth from the Lincoln Street parking lot towards the berm. And a forest should not be this green, this overgrown. It's supposed to be green, but it's supposed to be open, right? Basically a native healthy forest has it open, has stuff on the understory. You see some like, what's it? No, basically the ground level plants, understory plants, in the mid-story. But most of that is burning bush, actually, before the leaves change colors.
This is before we started the project.
This is
right?
before we
Yeah.
started the project. Took it as a reference point. I actually do not have an after, but if you walk through it today or in the spring, you see what it's supposed
It
to
was
look
very
like.
different, yeah.
Very different. And so, thanks to a lot of our great volunteers, we began clearing this land. And so this is an example of what a monoculture looks like. You see, all that green is not supposed to be there. There's a brick there for scale. These plants are probably about 3 feet tall. Some of them are about maybe 5 feet tall, as like Jody would tell you. It's always fun. We have a couple volunteers in the room right now, but it's always, these are big plants. But when we start clearing it, this is what the forest should look like. This is the native understory that was under that barberry. And so you have some ferns, there's some spice bush over there, there's some other stuff, right? But essentially, you start going from this to this, right?
How hard was it to pull it out? Sorry, I forgot.
That was a day. We did that in
That was a day. So
Yeah.
probably like 4 or 5 of us, probably about, maybe like half the size of this room.
And we worked for 2 hours and
Yeah.
we were able to do
wow.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just started digging it out. Basically, of course, we got permission from the Conservation Commission first. We started working on this project, digging it out. And throughout the year, we really quite cleared a lot. And this is a good picture to show an area that we didn't get to yet and an area that we cleared. You can see that contrast of like, this is what the forest should look like in the fall, right? This is not what the forest should look like. But in the spring, you start to see why we do this. These are all herbaceous plants that come up every year. So here's some Jack in the Pulpit that started coming up. Here's some baneberry that started coming up. There's a lot of other stuff below here. There's a geranium. There's a spice bush back there. Here's a blooming wire geranium. I forget the name of that guy, but he is a native guy. But essentially the forest starts regenerating in the spring to the seed bank, right? This is what it's supposed to look like. You see lots of like turtle heads come up in the wetlands that otherwise aren't there. And we actually started seeing owls start showing up in the woods. That's like a barred owl?
Yeah, barred owl.
Barred owl.
Yeah.
And so we started noticing more owls, more birds, even more rabbits.
What is that on the left?
That is a turtle head.
Yeah, they
What is
grow
it?
a turtle head. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so they bloom like a white or a purple, and they grow in wetland areas. Yeah, they're pretty.
yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to describe with pictures. I invite everyone in the spring to come out and see it. I'm happy to give a tour. You know, the flowers coming up. It looks pretty cool. And maybe we can set up like an event
Yeah.
that I can give a tour of it once they start blooming. And so by the end of 2024, through all great volunteers, we started clearing quite a bit. And so this is just on this one side of the berm, right? So we cleared about 3.5 acres-ish. We had about 1 acre we had like partially cleared, we were kind of working on. And then we have some areas that we kind of untouched, right? It's like we kind of started, this is the main trail in the Danforth. But we had great volunteers and great support from people, and we were able to clear quite a bit. And so with that, we were able to apply for a grant through a local organization, Suasco-Sisma, with some matching funds from the Conservation Commission. We were able to do some replantings. So in the spring, we had kind of a fun adventure of, my cat loved it for like the 5 days I stored the plants on the porch. Because I didn't want the rabbit in the yard eat all these plants. And basically, much to his disappointment, we eventually got on the Danforth and did some replantings, particularly in the front part of Danforth. And this is important, right? This is a boundary area. There's neighbors across the street. There are invasives across the street. We don't want them to come back in. It's areas you have to watch. Brooke mentioned disturbances, edge habitats. That's how these plants get in there.
And what are you replanting? What was,
Yeah, so we picked a bunch, we kind of looked at the surrounding area in Danforth, and we picked plants based off of that. So some of it was ironwood, so some of it was like mid-story trees. We really focused on mid-story and understory. We also planted blueberry bushes. We tried honeysuckle, I don't know if it did super well. And then spice bush and winterberry were other ones that we planted too, yeah.
Now you listed honeysuckle as an invasive.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, the native honeysuckle we planted. But the most predominant one is the invasive one.
Yeah.
That's what we were
Yeah, the
seeing.
invasive one is
Yeah.
like a Armor tartan. There's a couple of them. The way you can tell your honeysuckle is invasive is because one, it came from Siberia, and like you can tell because
Yes, earmuffs.
basically American honeysuckle from North America evolved to be pollinated and feed hummingbirds, so the flowers hang down, so the hummingbirds can get it. The ones from Asia are evolved for bugs, so the flowers go up.
Oh.
And also native honeysuckle, which we learned after we planted them in probably the wrong forest, is that they like dry areas.
Oh, no.
And so because of a native plant, if it's the wrong plant in the wrong area, it's just gonna
It's gonna
die out.
yeah, not
So,
do well.
unlike an invasive plant, which will kind of start taking over.
Mm.
But basically, yeah, a lot of these survived thanks to the heroics of volunteers who water them during this awful drought. And yeah, they're starting to revegetate the area. So by the end of 2025, this is where we're at. We gotta go a little slower because along the path we had a lot of burning bush, which was very hard to get out. And we're a little less consistent, but essentially, our 4.2 fully cleared. Across the river, we're good to. It was a little harder to do that this year. And about half an acre untouched on that side of the berm. So we're looking to finish it up this upcoming year, 2026. And of course, we're gonna have to continue to monitor and maintain it. Be sure it doesn't come back, but we're already seeing great results, and the forest looks very different. However, this is not just only Danforth, right? This is beyond conservation lands, right? And so, for example, I use Wood Park because I did map this because after Danforth, I'm going to try other parks in town to deal with this. For example, you have some bittersweet coming off the trees on the riverbank. This is important. You take down the trees on the riverbank, your riverbank starts moving. Wood Park's going to be wood swamp. You can start to see how the invasives affect, right? This is goldenrod, that's what we want. You see the bittersweet coming into the goldenrod, pushing out that pollinated area. There's some barberry, a big barberry, growing off in the woods down there. You see it on the rail trail. There's a lot of knotweed on the rail trail. And basically this highlights a challenge with how to manage this, right? It's knotweed. The only way to get rid of it is you have to do targeted herbicide applications, mainly because the root and the rhizomes go so deep, because it evolved, run over by lava, it's gonna keep on coming back. And a lot of these stands abut private land, and so like you can get rid of on the public land, but it's just gonna keep coming back on the private land. So this is like a challenge that we try to figure out is how do we get both stakeholders on board to kind of remove this and monitor it year over year. Of course, you see in the downtown area, there's something behind this library. You become at certain times of the year, especially along the Assabet River. A lot of it has been wiped out through efforts of projects, but along the Danforth Brook, coming from Bruce's Pond, there is a lot. There's some barberry, a lot of berries on it, a lot of knotweed there. We actually have some massive tree of heavens planted in the skate park, by the way.
Oh, no.
But they took care of them, right?
They were herbicided once.
Yeah.
But I think they need to be taken down fully. Of course, all over downtown. Knotweed is probably the worst. This is behind the businesses. This is on town property. Oh, that burning bush. Every time I go to Medusa, I just want to. Here's a growing out of Assabet retaining wall on the Assabet Rail Trail. I think from the rail trail. And of course, around town, barberry is very predominant, planted ornamentally all over the place. This is a little drainage stream off Walnut Street. I see a lot every day. And so really part of this talk is how do we educate the public, right? Is how do we do this? And so what can you do to help? Well, this is not going to come as a surprise. You should remove the invasive plants from your yard. If it is planted in your yard and it's not from North America, it's basically ecological junk food for anything out there. And it's a potential plant that could spread. Brooke and I are happy to help you identify plants in your yard. You can just send us a picture. We share our contact information. I can come out and tell you what it is. Maybe even rip it out for you. It depends how big it is. It's important to notice to plant native plants. But I mean native plants, stuff from New England. There's a lot of great resources. A lot of local garden centers sell native plants. You can always contact either of us, and we can give recommendations using a native plant list. But something we need a lot of help with is where they're located, right? Much as I like to truck around the woods, I can't be everywhere in the woods. Yeah. And so as you find these plants, please notify someone at the town or one of us that we can go out there and squash it before it starts spreading. This is important with stuff like the Bradford pear, kudzu, Myra minute vine. There's a whole porcelain berry. There's a whole bunch, and I'll show you the early detection list, which are not very common. but they're starting to spread. It's sort of like the start of a disease just getting into the forest. And so it's easier to take care of them now. Something else I've been doing lately, I've heard Pastor Kate Hogan about it, is supporting this bill in the House, is to establish kind of a strategy and funding for tackling invasive plants in Massachusetts through essentially some sort of group fund that they can give funds to various towns to address these problems or help educate, stuff like that. There's also the Massachusetts Biodiversity Initiative through the Department of Ecological Restoration seeking a similar goal for funding. I would like to thank everyone that's supported invasive efforts around town, particularly the Hudson Conservation Commission, Suaska SISMA, Grant, every volunteer that's spent time in Danforth. There's a couple in this room right now, but there's tons of people that if I listed everyone, there would just be tons of names. A lot of people have helped out in Danforth and around town. Green Hudson for hosting us. This is our contacts, and we sent them out afterwards. And we were sent out a big list of resources to everyone, just how to identify plants, various things. And we're happy to take any questions, but before I do, okay, a couple months ago I was playing around with ChatGPT about like wanted posters for invasive plants, mainly because my friend was doing this H.P. Lovecraft D&D game we were playing at the time. So I was doing these like cosmic horrors, but everyone beware of these invasive plants. They're basically cosmic horrors from another planet, and they've come here to, cause issues. I kind of like it, but I asked it like show like a choking plant, like this like octopus and stuff like that. So anyway, happy to take any questions about plants, native plants.
What do you do if you see a nursery selling like snow on the mountain, which is basically goutweed?
Yeah, you can report them to the state, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful. I think it's so pretty because it's green and white and has a pretty flower, but it's hot. Oh my God, I have it in my yard and it's like
a
curse.
Yeah, but see, there's a lot of plants which are on the verge, and there is an early detection committee at the state level who kind of rates plants on like, are they invasive or not? And then they vote on it, I think, every year. So recently the Bradford pear, the Calgary pear, and there's one other they put on there. But you should document it spreading and send it to them. I would send the link to this Early Invasive Species Council.
Oh.
And so then like they will, when they meet, they will be like, we're getting more reports of the spreading. But there's like another one, it's like evergreen. It's like this vine. It's not evergreen, it's like this, I forget the name of it. But I see it start to spread in Danforth, and I've been ripping it down. And I've been contacting them, and they're like, oh yeah, we've been keeping an eye on that. And I'm like, well, it's here. So.
What do you do with this stuff that you're pulling out?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It depends on what it is. So Japanese knotweed, you have to put it into trash bags and let it basically cook in the sun, because otherwise if it gets thrown into like a compost pile of roots.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So the knotweed we're very careful with in Danforth. What was interesting is with the burning bush and with the barberry, we are able to pull it out and kind of put it into piles. And we have to monitor those piles to make sure there's no resurgence, but they can only happen with seeds or runners. So it's not quite like the knotweed. It's able to provide like a kind of a brush habitat, and we haven't really seen things come back. We also really try to be aggressive when it's just leafing and it's or flowering. We try to tackle it before it goes to seed to kind of minimize that risk as well.
What's the one, is it bittersweet that goes up the trees
Yes.
and kills the trees eventually?
Yeah, that one's really bad, and the biggest problem we have with that, it has orange roots, but the roots go really deep and they go really far. So we try to really yank out as much as we can, but we do sometimes see them like, there's just like a small little root left and it still crops up, and then we have to, there's definitely going to be a maintenance schedule involved for sure.
Yeah, because my grandson really got into that, and he was trying to get rid of
Oh, that's good, yeah.
a lot of bittersweet.
Yeah.
So I have a neighbor in Hudson who plants native plant gardens. This is Alexi.
Okay.
Alexi, who's Emily Wilder's husband. And he presented one of our early climate cafes on native plants. And since he lived around the corner from me, and my other neighbor was the head of the Native Plant Trust, Debbie, she kind of, the second I moved, or she moved in, she said, those 3 are called burning bushes. You need to get them out, all the way down to the roots. And she told me to cut them into pieces, put them in a black plastic bag, and you know, that whole thing. But they came back, of course. So Alexi, who worked with planting these things and weeding out others, he has this little bottle of, he won't tell me what it is, and it has a little spongy top, and he puts it on the top of the roots, so if you can cut it down as far as you can, and then put this stuff on it, it doesn't grow back. And I had good experience with that, but it meant I had to call him to come over. So what do you recommend for us non-experts to stop them from growing back? Because there is a way, I know there's a way.
Yeah, so it's gonna depend on what exactly you're taking out, right? So
Well, this was burning bush.
yeah, burning bush will send out runners.
Right.
And so something we've had to do in Danforth is that the small guys you can just rip out, like the small shoots. There's some that have probably been there for like longer than I've been alive, and they're big.
Yeah.
And the only way to get those out is you have to dig them out using a weed wrench, or you have to add the magical solution on there to eliminate it.
Yeah.
Luckily, because if these are on your own private property, you can apply that solution.
Yeah, and what is the name of that solution?
It is glyphosate.
Don't whisper, because
It's basically
Glyphosate, right?
yeah, it's basically glyphosate,
yeah.
triphosphorus. It's basically different types of herbicides.
Like Roundup.
Yeah, but the thing is that it's targeted,
Yes.
so it doesn't cause a risk to everything else.
Right. No, that's why you
Yeah.
dabbed on.
Yep,
But where can you get that?
you can get it from the hardware store and Home
Well, all
Depot,
those places.
Amazon.
all
and
those
Amazon,
stores
hardware store, stuff like that.
So it's horrible stuff, and we
You
shouldn't
should-
use it except very carefully.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and at certain times of the year, because it's only effective on certain times of the year, and probably Alexi can speak to it better than me.
Right.
But essentially, you want to apply it in the fall when it's returning the nutrients back to the roots, and then you apply it and it sucks it back in.
Got it.
If you put it in the spring, it's not going to do anything.
And then it also avoids amphibian reproduction season, because sometimes the surfactants and things like Roundup can bind to the nodules for metamorphosis. So
Yeah.
also avoiding the spring helps out the
Avoid the spring.
amphibians.
Avoid the
Okay.
spring.
Okay, well, that's when it's coming up.
You
so
spot
it's
a
too
pull. Yeah. In the spring, you just want to pull them.
late. Okay.
These are the small shoots coming up, or
Yeah.
these the stumps?
For me, they were small shoots.
Yeah, those you just have to dig.
Okay,
The small shoots, the herbicide, you just put on a stump.
okay.
The small shoots, you can just dig them out. And like, it's a little annoying, but usually once or twice a year, dig them out. You basically want to starve them of nutrients, right? Because basically you just chopped it, the plant's going to resprout, you got to chop it again. Eventually, it will run it out. If it's something like knotweed, that's a completely different beast. You probably want to call on a professional, because that one, if you move it to a different location, it can spread. And I'm always very worried of what happens to the knotweed that's trimmed on the side of the road.
Right.
And I imagine it's just ended up in someone's compost bin pile, and it
Yeah,
spreads it
great.
later
Yeah.
on
Feeding it well.
elsewhere.
Huh.
But something like a barberry doesn't resprout as aggressively as we thought. And so that was a big worry initially in the project, is like, and like, just from my experience, right, is that yes, they're scary, they're made to be scary, but I found that they're really not that intimidating once you kind of like get to know them a little bit, right? Right, and so it's sort of like, well, this is something that, like, I have no education or background in this area. I'm like a tissue engineer by training and stuff like that. And really it was like curiosity that got me interested. Like during COVID, I was like learning about plants and going in the woods and like, what's this plant? And I was like, oh, that's supposed to be there. And then it's kind of like, you know what? I think I'd like to go in the woods. I'm just gonna start this project with some people, and so like the one you really have to be afraid of is this guy, but the rest of them I fear or is tackled over by just normal people.
And the identification process too is kind of like community learning. I feel like we went out in the field and we all had kind of like, we were very careful with like a idea of what we were targeting when we first started, and then we were kind of learning from each other. Like, oh, I recognize this one. This is privet, and we're like, oh, okay. And so like we're kind of like looking at things together and learning together. And so, and you know, if someone's like there and they're kind of new and they're like, am I pulling the right thing? Move over, like, yeah, here's how you tell. And it's a very organic way of learning, which is really fun. Yeah.
And don't the birds often eat the berries, and they're the ones that deposit them all over
They
the
do,
woods?
yeah, they
That's
are
what we heard
vectors.
about the Japanese.
Yes, yeah, they can be vectors for, especially with bittersweet. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of it, the birds are just, they don't know they're eating. They're just like, oh, berries.
Yeah.
But it's really like bird junk food to them.
Yeah.
Like, and so it spreads it.
Yeah.
Do they eat barberry? Because of those thorns, looks like they wouldn't eat barberry.
Yeah, actually, ironically, they like the burning bush a lot more. And there's been studies on this of like what berries the birds like. And so the barberry will spread, but usually spread out from the barberry plant. And so it would often drop a berry, or the berry would wash a little bit and resprout, or the frond, they're these big fronds, would go down and reroot. And so like they get snow and leaves, and then would reroot and make a new plant. Burning bush, studies have shown the birds will like take it really far. And so sometimes you find isolated ones in the woods and start spreading from there. The bittersweet they love.
The burning bush has a berry?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not.
I haven't seen them. I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it does have a berry. They're very popular berries amongst the birds.
They're tiny though.
They're
and
tiny.
they kind of look like they're covered in leaves a little bit, I feel like. Yeah.
I've never seen them.
Yeah, they're very tiny. Some of the cultivars, the new cultivars from the stores, don't have berries. However, the Bradford pear didn't have a berry originally, and then evolved it.
Oh.
So like they can change.
Do any invasives ever come off the list?
That's a good
And
point.
in other words, do we ever win?
Purple loosestrife, there's been,
Well,
I think,
that I
problems.
wondered,
Yeah, that's been a lot. I've never seen them come off.
because there's still purple loosestrife around.
There
I
is,
thought
but
there
it
was
used
two
to be
types.
everywhere.
Yeah, it used to be.
Yeah, ironically, as it also gets warmer, some of these plants also move out of range. So like if you go down to Maryland, you don't see much barberry. Even though I was planting in the yards, I don't see it in the woods.
Because they're giving it to us.
And it may be too hot, right? And so probably the worst infestation of those are in New York and Boston, right? And a lot of this was driven actually academically, like, you know, Harvard and University would send expeditions to Asia and bring back the plants for the arboretums. And they'd be like, oh, look at all this. And I always joke with Brooke that my family is partially to blame. If you chase my roaches back, they funded some of those expeditions.
Wow.
So a lot of them came back for curiosity, and then they got out. And someone actually recognized invasive back then. And it's actually, the barberry is a funny story, is that there was actually an American barberry, right, that's native to the U.S., but was not native to the U.S. as wheat. And so when the Europeans brought over wheat to grow, they found out that the American barberry harvested a wheat blight. And so the government was like, we have to get rid of this American barberry. We're going to replace it with European barberry.
Oh, no.
Turned out to be the same issue. And then they brought over the Japanese barberry,
Oh, no.
which like, doesn't have the wheat blight, but now has other issues. So it's sort of a constant battle.
Another question.
Yeah.
Do the invasives play any role in the process of lowlands or streams or turning to swamp?
So you mean like creating like
Yeah,
different
maybe
habitats?
hastening the process or something like that.
Interesting. I know that with erosion, for example, right? Like, I mean, knotweed's awful, but I know that it sometimes will go in easily erodible areas, right? So in that case, it would prevent sedimentation technically. I mean, you could replace it with something better, but in terms of expediting the process, yeah, I'm not sure if people looked into that, honestly.
Yeah.
Could be interesting to look at,
That would
yeah.
help a little bit, because like, let's say a bittersweet takes down a tree, right? It's not even a beaver taking down a tree. And then that slowly erodes the shoreline.
Yeah, it could expedite some disturbance mechanisms for sure. Yeah.
How do you leave people feeling motivated? What do you suggest that we do?
Yeah, so the community project that we did was really successful. We've gained a lot of headway. If anyone wants to come out and learn about invasive plants, we're going to pick up again in the spring, and we can show you guys how to look at them. We do entirely mechanical pulling, so we can show you how to pull stuff. And yeah, just like eliminating things from your own yard. We'll provide resources of places where you can report sightings of different plants that have different levels of, potential hazards to our ecosystem. So yeah, reporting, checking out your own yards in your own area to figure what's out, and maybe come join us on a Saturday in Danforth. Yeah.
Now you publicize those polls, right? The
Yes.
things you do.
Yes, we have a listserv that Patrick will send out emails. We try to do every Saturday, but sometimes life happens. And
The weather.
or the weather,
You're
yeah.
busy.
Thunderstorming.
Okay.
So yeah, join our listserv and we'll send out stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're happy to share information, and then also, especially in your neighborhoods, talk to your neighbors, right? Like if you find it ugly, they probably find it ugly also, and if you all want to work together on clearing it out, just like basically the project works because people care about the woods. It's like people I never knew before and met, just bonding over ripping out plants in the woods and talking and stuff.
Yeah. I've spoken with people about their burning bushes, and they love their burning bushes, so I haven't had great success about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some people sometimes do an in-between. They'll pull off the berries before the birds can get them. Sometimes people do that with invasive plants that they're kind of attached to. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or like I said, we're starting with like a barberry, showing them like a pretty native alternative they put in place. Someone's interested in, and we're gonna have fun with this because Brooke likes me pollinator gardens, and I find it interesting of like the challenge of trying to get something to flower at each time of the year. So like you plant stuff, and then you're like, oh, I'm missing something here. Let's add something in there, and then you start seeing all these bees and stuff, and then it's like interesting. Occasionally, invasive will show up in the garden. You rip it out, but yeah. There's a lot of cool native plants that have been wiped out just due to previous disturbances, and no one sells them easily accessible. But when you look at them, they're pretty neat.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
having
thank you
us.
very much.
It's really been informative.